Welcome to video 2 of session 3 of Mid-Program Workshop. So you have your community action project idea, or you are deciding between a few ideas at this point. How do you take an idea and make it come alive? We'll be going through some of these steps in this video. Be sure to still have your community action project brainstorming worksheet from the previous session readily available for this session. Let's dive in. The project that you are planning should be realistic for you to achieve within the time you have, within the resources that you have, including any team members, financial resources, equipment, space, balancing your regular work schedule with this project, and other factors that we have already reviewed. We encourage this project to be part of your regular work or supplemental to your regular work when you return back home, so that you can involve others and integrate it into a sustainable model. Some of you may have some funding for your projects, but it's likely that most of you will be implementing a very low resource project and should be prepared to implement it at little to no cost. A small pilot project is a great way to test the effectiveness of an approach called a proof of concept, which can demonstrate the value of scaling up the project to a potential donor in the future. It's important to consider these factors before you plan your project. We'll go through these different factors around planning your project now. Think about what skills exist within the community. You want to make sure you're planning a project that, of course, utilizes your own skills and utilizes the skills of those in your community. For example, if your project is about installing solar lights around different communities, it will be very hard to implement this project successfully if you personally do not have this expertise, or if others in your community have never worked with solar lights at all, right? That would be quite difficult because those skills don't exist quite yet, and it's even new for you. So you want to think about an area where you know that you have these skills to implement this project, and you know of other people who can help you doing so. Next is the potential for sustainability. We've talked a lot about how your project should potentially be small scale, maybe a pilot project, and low resource. But how can you potentially scale up this project in the future, and what will make it sustainable? So that it's not just something that only lasts 6 months and then you move on with the rest of your work and life, but it's something that can be connected to a larger project that's sustainable over a period of time. Next, potential partners. You'll want to consider who the potential partners could be for your project, and we'll be talking about that shortly. Next are potential risks. In the last video, we talked about a few of these. For example, what are some risks associated politically with implementing your project, if there are any? Are there any legal risks with implementing your project? You'll want to think about certain risks as you continue planning your project. Of course, you want to think about the resources that are needed and where they might be found. So let's take that solar light example again. Let's say that's what you want your project to be about, but you do not have identified the resources to actually make this happen. What if right now there is no solar energy now in your community? What if there are no solar lights? And what if your organization is only starting to explore solar lights? Therefore, it might not be the best project to say that you will install 1,000 solar lights across your community within 6 months, because those resources simply might not be there. Instead, maybe you want to start with an educational outreach initiative, with a policy advocacy initiative around solar lights or solar energy. So looking at really what resources currently exist, and if they don't exist, where might they tangibly be found realistically in your time setting. Next, you want to be sure to think about existing projects in the community and how to incorporate or complement them. So again, let's take this solar example. Let's say you choose to go with something around solar energy or solar lights. But what if you discover that another organization is doing exactly what you want to do? Does it make any sense to replicate that if they're already doing that? Instead, what can you do to complement the work they're doing or work in partnership with other organizations that have a similar mission and activities as you? So again, you really want to do a landscape map or an assessment, even a small scale assessment on your own, of what exists within your community and how you can either work together with them or complement the initiative that they currently have ongoing. And of course, you want to think about the feasibility of completing the project within a given timeline and limited resources. So, for example, let's say I'm working on girls' education. We talked about that example in a previous video. And what if I had my community action project goal to be to educate 1,000 new girls across the community starting at age 8 and see them graduate from secondary school? What's wrong with that goal? There's a few things. First, you have to look at if it's realistic to really enroll an additional 1,000 girls into school within 6 months. Second, I'm starting with girls who are the age of 8. My project is only 6 months in length. Therefore, I will not be able to see if they're actually going to graduate from school, right? It will only be the enrollment process and potentially retainment over the 6 months in school. So you want to make sure your project is feasible within your given timeline and within your resources. So that might be a long-term goal as part of a bigger project, and my community action project might just be the 6-month initial period of that bigger picture project. These are some of the things that you'll want to consider as we move ahead to plan your community action project. And again, don't forget about other CSB leaders and alumni, your host organization, or other organizations in your network who can be a resource. Before you start planning all the stages of your project, it's important to recognize or reiterate something that we already know, that we can do nothing if we try to do it completely alone. Change is hard, and it takes a lot of people working very hard and strategically to make change happen. So before moving ahead and planning your project, you'll want to understand who is in your network. Who can you lean on for support, encouragement, or resources? Who's in your support network who can help make this project possible, and what already exists within your community? Do you know the famous quote by Margaret Mead? Well, this quote says that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So we hope that this quote helps inspire you to think strategically about what group of people you have in your support network. To plan for success in your community action projects, you'll need to have that support. You'll need to engage your stakeholders. So who are those stakeholders? Who's in that circle right now with you? Who can help support this work? To help you think through this, let's focus now on this video on network mapping. The first step to building and strengthening your network is identifying who is in your network and finding your network gaps. Who's currently not in your network, who you want to bring in. The second step is then learning the strategies to both bring in new stakeholders into your network and build committed support from both new and old stakeholders. This is what you'll be learning and practicing over the course of the next few months. In this session right now, we'll focus on that first step of identifying your network. Right now, make sure that you have the network mapping worksheet open in a Word document on your computer or printed in front of you. If you do not have that readily available, please pause the video and make sure you have that worksheet because I'll be guiding you through that worksheet now. Again, it's the network mapping worksheet. You'll need this for the remainder of the session. Some of you have heard of network mapping as an activity or tool using technology to pull in data electronically on a visually complex map. Some of you may have completed a network map and analysis in this way. And if so, think of that kind of network mapping as a very advanced version of what we'll do today. For the sake of our time together today, we will start at the beginning of network mapping to identify who is in your network and where are the gaps. First, we must know who is in our broad network and what area of our network they would fall into in order to really do an assessment of our network. So there are categories within networks that some of you may have learned about this before. You may have used different terminology, but for now, we're going to focus on a few different categories. Before we get started, when I say someone in your network, this should be an individual who you have direct contact with and that you would feel comfortable reaching out to for support. As I prompt you through these initial questions, do not include anyone that you want to connect with, but you currently are not connected to. So for this activity, you will be brainstorming again people you already feel connected with, who you can communicate with at any point by reaching out over the phone or email, for example. And for this activity, you'll want to brainstorm people here in the United States, as well as people back home or around the world who you identify are in your network. So on your worksheet, you will see 4 categories of contacts in network mapping. These 4 categories are 1, professional contacts within your organization, 2, professional contacts outside of your organization, 3, life or social contacts, and 4, beneficiaries or stakeholders or other. I'll go through these 4 with you right now. So the first one are professional contacts within your organization. This is anyone that you have a professional relationship with at your organization, either your US practicum organization or where you work back at home. If you work for a few different organizations, you can include different people there. If you work for an organization but also volunteer regularly for another organization, you can include both of those in this. Remember that these are people within your network who you can easily rely on and communicate with. For example, a professional contact within my own organization, I might put Megan Smith. You all know Megan. Her and I are very close. I know I can count on her. I know that I can contact her, and I see her almost every day. She's a professional contact within my organization. Now, let's say, for example, that there's someone who works on a different project, but I've never talked to them before because my organization is big. I would not put that in my network right now because I do not have direct contact with that individual. So that second category is professional contacts outside of my organization. In this quadrant, you want to list someone outside of your home or host organization who is a professional contact with, who you have a trusting relationship with. This could be at one of your partner organizations, potentially at a previous employer or volunteer organization that you had previously been involved in. For example, I might list someone from a previous job I had when I was working in Austin, Texas. I have 1 to 2 people that I still keep in very close contact with at my former employer in Texas. So I might list those 2 people under that quadrant. Next are your life and social contacts. This is anyone who's really important in your life, but not a professional contact. This could be a person who you have a trusting relationship with, can depend on for support and advice, such as your closest friends, your closest relationship with your religious institution perhaps, a significant other, or so on. For example, I am very close with my sister. She's not a professional contact because we don't work together, we never have, but she's someone who I can contact and I do almost daily or weekly for support and advice, who will always give me feedback and who I know I can count on. So for me personally, I might list my sister under my life contacts. Next is the final quadrant of the beneficiaries, stakeholders, or other. Is there anyone else in your network who did not fit into any of these categories that I already talked about? For example, if you're a teacher, you might want to list your classroom of students who you are very close with. Or perhaps you run a mentoring workshop for girls, and the volunteers or girls or beneficiaries could be listed here. This is an area where you can either list beneficiaries or stakeholders or any other individual that you feel like is very strong in your network, but you couldn't quite place into those other 3 quadrants. So right now, pause the video and fill in these 4 quadrants with these categories. This might take you some time, so spend a few minutes, up to 10 minutes, however long you need to fill out these 4 quadrants. We encourage you to try and think of about 5 contacts within each quadrant. That's the average number that people usually have as very strong contacts within each quadrant. You may have more or less. There's no right or wrong. So please pause the video now and complete this front page of your worksheet. Welcome back. After you've completed the quadrants of your network, let's see what you discovered. Take a moment now and notice which quadrants were easier to fill in and which were harder. Which quadrants do you have more contacts in and which do you have less? Pause the video and just take a few minutes to look at who you wrote down and to answer the questions that are on the screen about which quadrants have more or less contacts and were easier or harder for you. So now that you've identified who is in your broad network, let's focus on developing your core network. Some of you might have heard this term before or have used it differently. A core network is a concept renamed from a Strategic Connections book by Ann Baber and Lynn Wayman. And it's a term that they use to really hone in on who is specifically going to be your go-to people that you need to be successful for a certain aspect of your work or life. So now we're going to focus in on that, the core network. Let's look at sheet 2 of the worksheet. And this is where you will focus on your community action project and what support you'll need from your network to successfully design and implement your project. Right now, complete the first part of page 2 of the worksheet where you rewrite your goal and approach for your community action project from your brainstorming worksheet. So pause the video and rewrite the goal and approach to your community action project now. After you've completed this section with your project goal and approach, let's think about who are your project stakeholders. A stakeholder is anyone with a vested interest in your project. Who are the key people you want to bring in? Think of this for your CAB. Who do you need in each of your network categories to move this project towards success? This should be a group of about 10 to 15 key contacts. Who will you need for helping to plan and implement the project? Who can help connect you to the right people? Who can provide you feedback, be a mentor or resource? Who has expertise and knowledge that you need? Who can encourage, support, or inspire you? And who has the power to approve or slow down your progress? This could be someone who might be a spoiler. Again, a spoiler is anyone who could slow down or disrupt your project. So you want to think about this as well. So let's go back to your worksheet and you want to complete the next section where you'll take a few minutes and write the different names that you wrote on the first page, but put them into these categories that are on the screen and are on your worksheet. So pause the video now to do so. So now that you've nearly completed page 2 of the network mapping worksheet and have identified your core network, consider where are your gaps. Step 2 is identifying your core network gaps. You want to list the categories with the fewest names. This is your weakest network area. That's step 2, identifying the gaps. Next is step 3. Who can you then bring in? Who are your needed stakeholders? List people you have not listed yet, who you want to bring into your network. Pause the video and complete steps 2 and 3. So we will discuss much more about relationships and partnership buildings in the next CLI course on strategic partnership building, and more about nurturing these relationships and motivational leadership. For now, knowing who's in your network and who can specifically support your project is a key component to moving forward. This session is just touching the surface of network mapping and stakeholder engagement. We hope you found this useful. For those of you with more advanced skills in this area, we hope you share these with your peers and help them through this process. It's really important to think about your network and how you can bring in people to help support you. Next, you want to post in the discussion forum for this session, and you want to think about these 3 questions. In which quadrants did you identify the smallest network, and why do you think this is? Where did you notice the gaps in your stakeholders who can help support you in your project? And what insights or questions did this worksheet or activity bring up for you? So take some time to post in the forum and comment on each other's posts, then move on to the next part of this session.